Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham, and the primary is over, and we have ourselves a red wave. Now, I have been saying for over a year now that in 2026, we are set up to have a red wave in California, and you all said that I was crazy, that California can't change, that we're just entrenched to be blue and liberal for the rest of time. But the results are rolling in, and while preliminary, they are showing some strong signs that Republicans are performing far better than anyone anticipated they would. I am going to take you through all of the results, all of the statewide races, everything that you need to know today. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information or you want the sources cited in compiling today's episode, you should check out the corresponding article on my website, which is linked below. So, we have some preliminary results of Tuesday's primary election. Now, California is really stupid, and that means that we don't count the votes immediately. So you see all of this online of officials saying, oh, it could be weeks, it could be months before we even know the results of this primary election. But thankfully, we do have about 50 to 60% of the votes in for most races. And so we do have a broad idea of who is going to advance to the November election. And so just a disclaimer, things could change and shift. I'm sure that numbers are going to move a bit. And so some of the first and second places could potentially swap if they're really close. But the overall direction of this election is moving red. So let's start with the governor's race, because that's the race that everyone cares the most about. Now, we knew that there were going to be three main contenders in this race. We knew it'd be a toss-up between Xavier Becerra, between Steve Hilton, and between Tom Steyer. And that is exactly what happened. They are the top three. But what is so exciting, what is most shocking, is that Steve Hilton, a Republican, is in the lead ahead of all of the Democrats who were in the race. So as of Wednesday, June 3rd, there were 54.4% of the votes counted, and Hilton was sitting in a comfortable lead with 27.8% of them. Becerra was then in second place with 25.4%, so not that far behind. And then Steyer was pretty distant third, over at 19.6%. So it's very clear that the two who will most likely be advancing are going to be Hilton and Becerra. And again, they could flip as the remainder of the votes are counted. Becerra could pull ahead to be in the lead, but it's a strong start for Hilton, and it is a good signal that he is going to make it to the November election. Now, the rest of the candidates were very far behind. So Chad Bianco was all the way down at 11%. Katie Porter only garnered 4.6%, so she really fell off the face of the planet. She was a lot higher a year ago, but even several months ago. And then all of the scandals that unfolded and just her general unlikability really pushed her down in the polls. And then the moderate mayor of San Jose, Matt Mahan, who we have talked about, came in basically off the board with 4%. So there really aren't any others who are close up there. The closest would be Tom Steyer, but at this point, it's pretty unlikely that he would make it to the runoff in November. So this is shocking. And could it change and flip around? Sure. But like I said, Hilton is going to make it. We are going to have a Republican in the November election. Now, we're going to get into a little bit later some of the demographics across California, some of the maps that are showing more of a red wave across the state and how this is happening. But for now, I just want to speak to a few of the down ballot races that we had discussed that are equally as important as the governor's race. So let's first look at lieutenant governor. Now, this is basically the vice president role of a state. And so it's largely seen as symbolic. A lot of people joke that there's not a lot of responsibility attached to it. But at the end of the day, the lieutenant governor is the person who steps in for the governor if they travel out of the state, if they are removed from office, or if something happens to them and they no longer occupy the office. So it's very important that we do have someone who would be a good person in that office should they ever be needed. And then, of course, they're going to assist the governor. Of course, they're going to be given responsibilities. And so once again, we have a Republican winning this race. Gloria Romero, she is running with Hilton, and so they are kind of going to be a package deal. She is at 19.9%. But second place is very, very close behind. The Democrat Fiona Ma is at 19.1%. So literally just thousands of votes are separating them. But this is a really good sign because, again, we have a runoff to November, and so we're going to have a Democrat and we're going to have a Republican. And if Steve Hilton is boosting up in the polls, and if he can gain enough support to actually win the governorship, it's likely then that Gloria would follow in that lieutenant governor role. Another office that we looked at is the Attorney General. This is such an important office. The Attorney General is the chief law officer of a state and the top prosecutor. And so they are going to be responsible for executing a lot of the laws, carrying them out, making sure that they are enforced and followed. And then on top of that, we've seen how this can be abused when there are ideological views that are being set forth by the governor and other officials in our state. And so, for example, Rob Bonta is the incumbent in this office. We talk about Rob Bonta all the time. His name comes up a lot. And that's because he's always suing everybody. Not only does he brag about the fact that he sues Donald Trump left and right, which just uses time and taxpayer dollars to do so, but on top of that, he's bullied school districts because they don't want to teach radical gender ideology in schools. He sued Huntington Beach because the voters there wanted to enact voter ID. Even though the voters literally wanted it, he stepped in and said, no, from a statewide level, we will not allow this. And he has targeted pro-life pregnancy centers across our state. So overall, not great. We don't love him. And so it's sad that he has done so well. But we need to look at the numbers because he has pulled ahead in this election. He has 52.4% of the votes. But what's important to realize is that's not that far ahead, especially for an incumbent office and for a Democrat in California to just have 52% of the votes. Not really staggering. And so we have another 5 months for his contender, Michael Gaetz, to make up some of that ground. So Gaetz came in at 42.7% of the votes, and this was only 468,000 votes behind him. So essentially, they're going to be against each other in November, and ideally, he will be able to make up some ground. That is a tight race in the state of California. Now, we also talked about the insurance commissioner, and this is not a very exciting office, but it is super important to every state, but especially California. We've talked before about how insurance companies are fleeing our state. We have so many regulatory requirements, and we have so much state intervention that it has made it severely difficult for insurance companies to be incentivized to want to be in California. And because of that, that affects you and me. That means our premiums go up. That means it's harder to find insurance carriers who are going to cover you, whether for your house or your car or whatever you're looking for insurance for. And so that is a direct quality of life issue. The insurance commissioner can set a lot of the policy direction that is going to govern over these insurance companies, that's going to oversee competition, all of that. So it's very important. Now, Stacey Korsgaden, she's a Republican. She is the best candidate for the job. Her idea says that what attributes most to the crisis are those policy decisions that I just mentioned. So she says that a lack of competition is what's driving rates through the roof, and we need to bring back competition. And she has many ways in order to do that, such as reducing a lot of those regulations and such. But she says, let's restore competition. It'll drive down the prices. And then on top of that, we can root out fraud. We can do all of these other things as well. Now, sadly, Stacey is currently in third place. She has 17.5% of the votes. And that's a bummer. And so we have to keep watching it to see how it ends up. But what's more of a bummer is who's in first place, because that would be Jane Kim, and she's at 23.7% of the votes. The reason I say that that is sad is because Jane Kim is radical. She is exactly opposite to everything that Stacey Korsgaden is. She believes that we should implement here in California a full single-payer home disaster insurance program. What that means, it's similar to universal health care, where the state is going to be collecting premiums from you and me, from consumers, and then using them to fund fire, flood, and other insurance coverage directly. So what she wants to do is eliminate private insurance carriers. And she wants to do this not only for home insurance, but she also wants to do it for auto insurance and for other types of insurance. This is stemming from the fact that she believes that competition does not drive down prices. She believes the exact opposite. She believes that competition means that companies just drive up their prices. This does not make any economic sense. This does not prove out in numbers or facts or history, and it's a very socialist point of view. And we don't need to really ask if she's socialist because we just have to look at who has endorsed her. She proudly puts on her website that she is endorsed by Bernie Sanders, she's endorsed by Ro Khanna, and by major labor unions. So she would enact some very socialist reforms to our insurance agencies across our state. And that would be a complete disaster. The good news, if there is a silver lining, is that the race for the number 2 spot is still currently tight. So Stacey is only 78,000 votes behind the person in second place, who is another Democrat, Ben Allen. He's not as radical as the first place contender. However, he's still an establishment candidate, so not much would change. So we need to watch this in the coming days as more and more votes are counted and hope that maybe there's a chance that she can squeak into that number 2 spot, and then we can campaign hard for her come November. The last statewide office I want to talk about is the Superintendent of Public Instruction. And this is another very important one because this person oversees all of the public education across the state of California. It means they also manage a lot of the state-funded education programs. So they're also dealing with money that's being allocated to our public education system. And this is important in California because public school here sucks. It's proven that students cannot pass exams for math or for reading. And we see that there's such an upswing in radical ideologies being pushed on students, especially, as I have mentioned, as it relates to gender. And so getting someone in this office who does not prioritize all of those things, but prioritizes just basic education and trying to improve that in our state would be huge. And this is where I think the best news is, and that is that once again, a Republican is in the lead and in a very significant lead. So Republican Sonia Shaw is leading at 24.9%. And that is very far ahead of the second place candidate, who's Richard Barrera. He is a Democrat. He's an activist. He's very radical. He's at 18.9%. So basically a full 5 or 6 percentage points ahead of him. So she's in a very comfortable lead here. The thing about Shaw is that she is actually the conservative Chino Valley School Board member who's been in the news because of the fights directly with Rob Bonta and Governor Gavin Newsom. So they sued this school district because they said that they didn't want to implement LGBTQ plus curriculum in the classroom. And she was one of the key members in fighting that lawsuit. And so she decided she wanted to run for this office, which is phenomenal. And now we see that she is in first place. Some of the things she wants to do when she takes office, hopefully, if she takes office, is she wants to remove biological males from women's sports. Amazing. She wants to recruit top educators who are going to focus on the basics of education to actually give our children a quality education rather than prioritizing ideology, which we love to hear. And she wants to protect parental rights and involvement in the classroom. I could just faint at reading all of that. That's such amazing policy positions. That is incredibly important. We need that reform in our state. We just need to focus on the basic issues. We want our kids to be able to understand math, science, history, reading, and we don't want them to be so worried about the social emotional learning that prioritizes ideology and, again, just this radical agenda that's being pushed by liberals, by Democrats, rather than just, can you read a book? Can you pass your standardized exams? These are the things that matter. So we see from these preliminary results that things are looking really good for Republicans. And I was genuinely surprised. I'm a very optimistic person about California, and I was hoping for the best, but it was discouraging to see some of the polling in the end days before the primary that were showing that maybe Hilton would get edged out, maybe we'd be locked out in a Democrat race, and I did not. Oh my goodness, I did not want to get on here and say, we have a race between Becerra and Steyer. This episode really could have gone one of two directions. And I'm very glad that it's going this direction because it is showing that we have momentum. But more than that, more than just the preliminary results of these statewide elections, there are some other indicators in the data of this turnout that are showing that we really do have a red wave crashing over us here in the state of California. The first thing is that if you look beyond vote totals and instead you look at maps, you look at county by county, what you see is that Republican candidates are the ones who are winning much of California's geographic area. And so Democrats are largely concentrated in the very urban and largest population centers. And this is nothing new. This has been happening across California for years. We know that it's similar in other states as well, where there's states where there's a lot of land. It looks like it's far more Republican. And then there are usually Democrat strongholds in these big cities. So in California, we have a lot of big cities and they're key and they're across the coast. And so those are the ones that are mostly voting for Democrats. But a majority of our state, just by size, just by surface area, is actually voting Republican. And so if we look at the map for the governor's race, we see here that the Republican candidate really had strength in inland California, while the Democrats were more on the coastal metropolitan areas. And so you look at this map and it's just like, oh my gosh, most people are voting for Hilton or Bianco. But we know that population is higher in some of those very dense urban centers. And so that is where support for Becerra or for Steyer is more concentrated. And then even if we look at the races where Republicans are losing, if we look at the races where the Democrats are pulling ahead, we still see the same pattern, which I think is so interesting. If we look at the Attorney General, we see that Gaetz carries the majority of these counties. You look at it and you think that Gaetz should be winning, but Bonta has concentrated in the more densely populated urban centers. And then on top of that, if we look at the insurance commissioner, Korsgaden carries much of the map. You see she is all across this map. And once again, the Democrats are concentrated in large cities. And so the takeaway here is that California is more competitive than it is often made out to be. California is a red state with blue cities that the rest of the state has been fighting to break free from. And I think that that's encouraging. That's encouraging because we're seeing change across the state. So we're seeing more and more counties flip to being red and flip to want to try something different than the Democrat rule that we have had for years that has not worked. But more than that, it's also encouraging to say that the areas where we have to change hearts and minds and sway public opinion are getting less and less. They're moving just to those major cities like Los Angeles, like San Francisco, like San Diego. Okay, well, we have our work cut out for ourselves in those cities, but most of the state is unified in what they are wanting in leadership. But that's not all. There are a few other signs of the red wave that is building in California as well. And one of them is the coalition that is being built by Republicans, specifically in this race by Steve Hilton, across different demographics of voters. And so this really comes out in the strength that he has had among Latino voters. And this is often painted as Republicans don't do well among the Hispanic population. And then especially when you look at over the past year or so with the Trump administration coming in the federal office and cracking down on immigration, and then California has been a sanctuary state, and we've seen riots that are against ICE and are in favor of illegal immigration. And so you start to think there's no way that a Republican could do well with the Latino community. However, you can see based on this map that in precincts with mostly Hispanic residents, Hilton is leading even over Becerra by 8 points, which is shocking because Becerra himself is Hispanic and he tries to appeal to that community. And so what is encouraging about this is to show that it's not that we have to be divided by specific communities. It doesn't have to be that just because you're part of one community or one demographic, that automatically means that you are going to vote one way or you're going to agree with one party. No, the issues that California is facing affect every family across the board, regardless of who you are. And people are feeling that and people are wanting change. And so even demographics that you might say, oh, they're just going to vote for the Democrat Party, that's not true. We are seeing that Republicans are picking up support because Republicans are running on common sense and because every demographic should want things like public safety and homelessness and crime and prices. They should want all of those things to improve. And on top of all of that, besides all of those things, perhaps the strongest reason for us as conservatives to be encouraged isn't really found in one single race at all, but in voter registration across the board. And this is something that I talked about, I think, over a year ago at this point, and the momentum has only continued to build because voter registration numbers are showing that between 2022 and 2026, the Democrats increased their voter registration by 10,000 people, but Republicans increased by 138,000, which is wild. That's staggering. That's more than 13 times what the Democrats saw in their increase in voter registration. And so while we understand that we are still outnumbered, and while we understand that doesn't mean that we're just going to take every race today, what it does signal to us is that the momentum is moving in one direction. There are far less people who are either registering to vote because they just turned 18 and so they're able to vote and so now they get to go register. Less of them are registering Democrat, or on top of that, there are people who are changing their voter registration, and so they are going and registering as Republicans. This is important. We are constantly told that California is permanently blue, that there is no point in fighting for conservative change in our state. But this is showing us change is slow. As I always say, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually. And so something like voter registration is a very slow signal. It's showing the shift. And as we see the outcomes of these races, we're seeing that the races are starting to grow tighter and tighter as the years go on, because more and more people want change from the absolutely horrific failure that has been going on in our government. So we cannot give up hope. And it's good that we have not given up hope, because there are some strong signs showing that California, it's moving red. Now, there is one race I have yet to talk about, and I would be remiss if I skipped over it, because for my Los Angeles listeners, we have to talk about the LA mayoral race. We talked a few weeks ago about Spencer Pratt and about his campaign. So where do the numbers stand? Now, just as a reminder, this is between incumbent Mayor Karen Bass and the outsider Spencer Pratt. And then there was also a third candidate, Nithya Raman, who is a lot more liberal and leaning socialist as well. And so the race was between the three of them. And whoever wins, so if someone got 50% or more of the votes, 50 plus 1, they would automatically have the title of mayor. And so with an incumbent candidate, it's pretty assumed that it's going to be tough to defeat that candidate, because usually the incumbent is who is going to win, especially when the incumbent is Democrat and they're in Los Angeles. However, this race did not disappoint us, because Karen Bass did not reach 51% of the votes. She is in first place, but she only has 35% of the votes. And Pratt is a surprisingly close second with 29.9. So basically 30%. He's nearly 5% behind her. That's insane. I was expecting that it would go to a runoff, but I wasn't expecting it to be that close. And so this is supremely embarrassing for Karen Bass. This is an indictment on her current leadership of the city. Clearly, people think that she is failing, because if they thought she was doing well, they would just vote her back in and she would have been elected as mayor last night. However, that is not what happened. People are wanting change. And so what we have to keep in mind here is it's not just that Republicans in Los Angeles were mobilized. It's not just that Republicans said, yay, we finally have a good candidate, and so we're going to show up to vote. Voter registration for Republicans in LA City is only 19%. Only 19% of registered voters are actual conservatives. But Spencer Pratt has nearly 30% of the votes. And we have to factor in the fact that not every single Republican turns out to vote. It's very frustrating. I wish everybody did. But not every Republican is showing up to the polls or casting their ballot. So that means there's a large percentage of votes that Pratt picked up from Democrats or from independents. That is incredible news. On top of that, we also have to remember that Pratt was only at 11% in the polls before the month of May. He just got 30% of the votes, and the votes aren't even done being counted. So he jumped from 11 to 30% in 1 month. What do you think he's going to do with the remaining months between now and November? It is so exciting to think that the momentum is building. His campaigns are fantastic. He's doing an amazing job. And again, he's just running on common sense. Things aren't working in Los Angeles. You know that they're not working in Los Angeles. It's time for change. It's time to come in and actually clean up and address the issues that are going on here. So that race will be so exciting and so important to watch. And I really think he has a very real chance of winning that in November. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground and there's so much to say, but finally, I just want to cover one more topic, and that is the fact that there were several close races in the House of Representatives for California that have a direct federal impact. And so we talked about this. Remember that last year, Proposition 50 passed, and that did a lot of redistricting across the state of California. And so some districts were completely wiped out. They were completely handed over to Democrats, and those weren't even close, so they're not even worth looking at. However, there were a few races where they either pitted Republicans against each other or where they tightened the race and they were expecting to either lock out a Republican by having Democrats advance to November or just make the race a lot tighter. And so there's one specific district that I want to focus on, and that is Congressional District 22. Now, this area was adjusted, the map was adjusted to include a lot more Democrat areas. And so this would be easier for Democrats to actually pick up this seat. However, what happened kind of backfired because Democrats really struggled to consolidate support, similar to what we saw in the governor's race. And so their vote completely split, and the Republican came in and just blew them out of the water. And so Republican David Valadao, he is the incumbent for that district. He garnered 44.5% of the votes, putting him in a very comfortable lead. Now, the question is going to be that once it's just him and one Democrat, how that's going to go in the November election. The race is looking tighter. And so they are trying to achieve the goal of having it be so that he gets booted out and that district flips to be Democrat come November. However, it is going to be much tighter. It's going to be much more of a fight than Democrats were expecting. They're expecting to just walk in and blow everything up. But it's starting to be a theme that even across a lot of the other districts where they thought that they were just going to pick it up easily, they're actually running into more fights than they maybe expected. Now, don't get me wrong, they have completely switched around districts. They are going to pick up seats in the House of Representatives. They have created districts where it's two Republicans running against each other. And so even though that's not a Democrat, that loses us a Republican. And so the races are going to be much tighter. But the point is that just as is happening with District 22, just as we see this as an example, Republicans aren't nearly as out of it as our state leaders and as our governor were hoping that they were going to be. So there you have it. There are all of the results that you need to know from California's primary election. And what's most important is that what we are seeing here is that across all of these races, there is a level of Republican performance that has outsized what anyone expected. And it is exciting. It's invigorating. It's great to see that we actually are making strides. We are making change across our state. And it's also great to have real hope that something can be done about it come the November election. And most importantly, I just want to mention that this is not without precedent, because the last time that a Republican completely toppled the statewide primary and then went on to win the governorship in California was back in 2003 with Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is when he came in. They recalled Gray Davis, who was the current governor at the time. He came in and he completely led in a very crowded field, similar to how Hilton is leading today. He blew everything out of the water, and then he was elected to governor. And then we saw that in 2006, he was re-elected to office, and he also led the primary there. So this is not the only time that this has happened in history, and history tells us that it can actually happen, that a good candidate who is leading in the primary can go on to win the governorship, and they can flip California from a Democratically run state to a Republican-led state. Now our focus shifts to November. We are more energized. We have momentum. We have so much excitement going into the next 5 months of wanting to push forward change, wanting to boost Hilton, wanting to boost a lot of these good candidates that we have talked about today who are going to advance to the election. And we need to focus in and really try to take advantage of this opportunity, because we don't get opportunities like this very often in our state. For the first time in a long time, we have a real hope for change. Now, let's get to work fighting for it. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state, and it was helpful to break down the results of this primary election. If you love this show, please spread the word and share it with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of The California Conversation.